She was humiliated in front of everyone, but when the mafia boss walked in, the entire room froze. What he revealed next didn't just shock the bride, it destroyed everything she thought she controlled. A single waitress was about to discover a truth that was hidden from her entire life, a truth powerful enough to change her destiny forever. But the real question is, why was she protected like she was the most dangerous secret in the city? And what happened in that wedding night that turned celebration into a silent nightmare no one will ever forget? The chandelier light shimmered over the grand ballroom like frozen fire. Crystal glasses clinked softly in the background. The air carried a mix of expensive perfume and fresh roses. It was the wedding of the year in the city. Everyone smiled too perfectly, like masks glued to their faces. At the center stood the bride in a white gown that sparkled with diamonds. Her eyes scanned the room like she owned every breath inside it. Near the buffet table stood a plus-size waitress in a simple black uniform. She carried a tray of champagne glasses with careful steps. Her hands were steady, but her eyes revealed quiet exhaustion. The bride noticed her instantly. A sharp smile formed on the bride's lips. She tilted her head and pointed at the waitress. "You, come here." The room grew slightly quieter, like the air itself was listening. The waitress approached with respectful steps. She could feel dozens of eyes pressing into her skin. The bride looked her up and down with open disgust. "You should not be serving at an event like this," the bride said coldly. A few guests let out awkward laughs. The waitress tightened her grip on the tray. Her heartbeat grew louder in her ears. The bride leaned closer, lowering her voice but not her cruelty. "You look like you belong in the kitchen, not in front of people." Silence spread across nearby tables. The waitress swallowed hard, trying to hold her dignity in place. Then the ballroom doors suddenly opened. A heavy sound echoed through the hall like a warning shot. Cold air followed the entrance of a man dressed in a dark tailored suit. His presence was heavier than the music, heavier than the crowd. Whispers spread instantly through the guests. "That is him," someone said under their breath. The mafia boss everyone feared had arrived without announcement. His eyes scanned the room slowly, observing everything without expression. He stopped when he saw the waitress standing frozen near the bride. The bride quickly changed her tone, stepping forward with a nervous smile. "I did not expect you to arrive so soon," she said softly. But his attention was not on her. It was fixed on the waitress who was still holding the trembling tray. He walked forward, each step calm but dangerous in its silence. The crowd held its breath as he reached her side. He looked at her face, then at the champagne glass shaking in her hand. Then he turned his gaze toward the bride. The temperature of the room seemed to drop instantly. His voice broke the silence, low and controlled. "Who allowed this disrespect in my presence?" The bride's confident smile shattered for the first time. The guests shifted uncomfortably, avoiding eye contact. The waitress felt her chest tighten as every sound faded away again. The mafia boss lifted his hand slightly, signaling the security at the entrance. The doors behind him closed with a final heavy sound. And in that sealed silence, his eyes narrowed as he spoke again while stepping closer to the bride, who suddenly realized the celebration was no longer under her control. The mafia boss stepped closer to the bride, and the sound of his shoes echoed like a final warning. The bride forced a nervous smile, but her lips trembled as she tried to hold her ground. The ballroom felt smaller with every step he took. Guests stopped breathing normally, afraid even a whisper would become a mistake. The waitress stood frozen beside the table, still holding the tray, her fingers now numb. The mafia boss slowly turned his head toward her again. His gaze softened for a brief moment that no one else noticed. Then he spoke without looking away from her. "Put the tray down." His voice was calm, but it carried absolute authority. The waitress obeyed immediately, placing the glasses on the nearest table with shaking hands. A faint clink of crystal echoed through the silence. The bride tried to laugh, but the sound broke halfway. "This is a misunderstanding," she said quickly, stepping forward. "She is just a waitress. Nothing important happened." The mafia boss finally looked at her fully. The air between them felt heavy, almost suffocating. "Nothing important," he repeated slowly. The bride nodded, desperate to regain control of the moment. Then the mafia boss raised one hand slightly. Two men in black suits entered the hall without a word. They stood near the doors like shadows that had come alive. The bride's confidence cracked further as she watched them. The Mafia boss turned slightly toward the crowd. "Everyone saw what happened here," he said. No one answered. No one dared. The waitress felt her heart pounding harder as a tension shifted around her like a storm. The Mafia boss took one step closer to her again. He looked at her hands, the small red marks from holding the heavy tray. Something in his expression darkened. The bride noticed his attention and forced a sharper tone. "She is nobody," she said loudly. The words echoed through the hall. For a second, everything froze again. The Mafia boss slowly turned his head back toward the bride. His eyes carried something colder than anger. It was disappointment mixed with warning. "You think status decides value," he said quietly. The bride hesitated, suddenly unsure of her breath. The guests shifted uncomfortably, some lowering their eyes to the floor. The Mafia boss reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded document. He placed it on the nearest table without breaking eye contact with her. The bride stared at it, confused and growing uneasy. "What is that?" she asked, her voice weaker now. He did not answer immediately. Instead, he looked at the waitress again. The silence stretched until it felt unbearable. Then he finally spoke. "Read the name on it," he said. The bride stepped forward slowly, her heels clicking against the marble floor. She picked up the document with slightly shaking fingers. Her eyes scanned the top line. Her expression changed instantly as the color drained from her face. The room seemed to tilt slightly as she kept reading. The guests leaned forward, trying to see what had shocked her so deeply. The waitress stood still, unaware of what was written, only feeling the shift in energy. The Mafia boss watched the bride carefully, as if waiting for the exact moment her world would break. The bride's hands began to shake more violently as she read the document. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. The name printed on the top line seemed to burn into her vision. Her eyes widened in disbelief, then confusion, then fear. The ballroom that once felt like a celebration now felt like a courtroom waiting for a verdict. The Mafia boss watched her reaction without a single change in expression. The guests leaned closer, trying to catch even a fragment of the truth. The bride finally lifted her head, her voice barely stable. "This cannot be real." Her words cracked in the middle. The Mafia boss stepped closer again, slow and deliberate. "It is real," he said calmly. The silence that followed was heavier than anything before it. The bride looked toward the waitress for the first time without arrogance. Her eyes now carried confusion, mixed with rising panic. The waitress stood still, unaware of the full weight of what was unfolding. Her hands were now clasped tightly in front of her, as if trying to disappear. The bride turned the document again, scanning every line with faster breathing. Her face slowly lost its color. The Mafia boss spoke again, his voice cutting through the tension. "You insulted someone who does not belong to your world of assumptions." A murmur moved through the guests like wind through dry leaves. The bride shook her head repeatedly, stepping backward. "This is a mistake," she said again, but weaker than before. The Mafia boss finally gestured slightly toward the waitress. "She is not just a waitress." The words landed heavily across the room. The bride froze mid-step. The waitress lifted her eyes slowly, still confused, still shaken. The Mafia boss continued, his tone firm but controlled. "She is under my protection." The ballroom reacted instantly with shocked whispers. Some guests covered their mouths. Others stepped back as if distance could protect them from what they had just heard. The bride's breathing became uneven. Her mind seemed to struggle to process what protection meant in his world. The Mafia boss walked closer to the bride until only a small space remained between them. His voice lowered. "And you chose to humiliate her in front of everyone." The bride tried to respond, but no words formed. Her confidence had completely collapsed now. The waitress felt a strange heaviness in her chest, watching the scene unfold like a dream she could not wake from. The Mafia boss turned slightly toward the entire room again. "This celebration continues under new understanding," he said. No one dared to move. No one dared to breathe loudly. The bride slowly lowered the document, her hands now weak. Her eyes filled with disbelief as she realized the situation could not be reversed. The Mafia boss gave a small gesture toward his men at the door. They stepped forward quietly, positioning themselves near the main exits. The atmosphere shifted again, tighter and more controlled. The bride looked around helplessly, searching for support from anyone in the room. But every guest avoided her gaze. The Mafia boss finally turned back to the waitress. For a moment, the hardness in his face softened again. He spoke in a lower voice meant only for her. "You are safe here." The waitress blinked, struggling to understand why her entire world had suddenly changed. Before she could respond, the bride suddenly spoke again, her voice desperate. "I did not know," she said quickly. "I did not know who she was." The Mafia boss turned his head slightly toward her. His expression remained unreadable. "Respect does not depend on knowing," he said. The bride stepped back again, realizing there was no escape from the moment. The guests remained silent as the weight of those words settled into every corner of the ballroom. The waitress slowly looked around, still overwhelmed, still standing at the center of something far larger than herself. And in the distance, the doors of the ballroom creaked slightly as the night outside pressed against the silence inside. The faint creak of the ballroom doors echoed through the silence. Every head turned instinctively toward the sound. Cold air slipped inside, brushing across the polished marble floor. The Mafia boss did not move. His presence alone seemed to anchor the entire room in place. The bride stood trembling, still holding the document like it had turned into something dangerous. The waitress remained near the table, her breathing shallow and uneven. She felt like she was standing inside someone else's nightmare. The Mafia boss finally took a slow step forward again. His shoes clicked softly against the floor, each sound deliberate. He looked around the room, scanning every face that avoided his gaze. Then his attention returned to the bride. "You invited me here," he said calmly. The bride nodded quickly, unable to trust her own voice. "You wanted my presence at this wedding." Another nod, more uncertain this time. The Mafia boss tilted his head slightly. "And yet you allowed disrespect in front of me." The bride's fingers tightened around the document until the edges bent. Her throat felt dry, as if the air had been taken away piece by piece. The guests remained motionless, like statues arranged around a silent disaster. The waitress shifted slightly, unsure whether she was even allowed to exist in this moment. The Mafia boss turned toward her again. His voice softened just a fraction. "Come here." The words were not a command that could be refused. The waitress hesitated for a moment, then slowly stepped forward. Each step felt louder than it should have been. Her heartbeat filled her ears again, drowning out everything else. When she reached him, she stopped a short distance away. He looked at her carefully, as if confirming something only he could see. Then he spoke again, louder this time so the room could hear. "You will not serve another tray tonight." A few guests exchanged uneasy glances. The bride's face tightened, but she said nothing. The Mafia boss raised his hand slightly toward one of his men. A black jacket was brought forward immediately. The fabric looked expensive, heavy and perfectly tailored. He took it and held it out toward the waitress. The entire ballroom watched in confusion. The waitress looked at the jacket, then at him. Her hands hesitated before lifting slightly. He placed the jacket gently over her shoulders himself. The touch was brief, but it changed the atmosphere instantly. A wave of shock passed through the guests. The bride's lips parted in disbelief. The Mafia boss stepped back half a step, observing her now properly. "From this moment," he said, "you are not to be treated as anything less than respect." The words hung in the air like a final decision. The waitress stood still, overwhelmed by the sudden shift in her reality. The weight of the jacket on her shoulders felt unfamiliar, almost unreal. The bride finally found her voice again, though it was weak. "This is humiliating for me," she said quietly. The Mafia boss turned slowly toward her. His expression did not change. "Humiliation is not what happened to you," he replied. The room went silent again. The bride swallowed hard, her pride collapsing in real time. The Mafia boss took another step forward, closing the distance between himself and the bride. "You judge someone by appearance," he said. "You spoke without knowing. And you forgot where you were standing." Each sentence felt heavier than the last. The bride's eyes dropped to the floor. For the first time, she had nothing left to argue with. The guests stood frozen, realizing the wedding had transformed into something else entirely. The music that once played softly in the background had long stopped. Only silence remained, thick and unbroken. The Mafia boss turned slightly, looking across the entire hall once more. "This night continues under new rules," he said. No one moved. No one spoke. Even the chandeliers above seemed to sway more quietly now. The waitress stood beside him, still processing everything that had happened in a blur of disbelief. Her life, which had felt invisible moments ago, now felt dangerously exposed to attention she never asked for. The bride slowly lowered her head, accepting a truth she could no longer deny. And in that suspended silence, the doors at the far end of the ballroom opened once again, as if something even larger was about to arrive. The doors at the far end of the ballroom opened once again. A slow, controlled sound echoed through the hall. Every guest turned at once, their fear renewed. The Mafia boss did not react immediately. He only narrowed his eyes slightly. The waitress felt her breath catch again, unsure of what new danger was entering the room. From the darkness beyond the doors, another figure stepped forward. A man in a long coat, carrying himself with quiet authority. His presence was different, but equally heavy. He stopped just inside the entrance, scanning the room carefully. Then his eyes locked onto the Mafia boss. A brief silence stretched between them. It was not hostility. It was recognition. The bride looked between them, confused and exhausted. The guests remained silent, sensing the shift in power but unable to understand it. The new man finally spoke. "You were not expected here tonight." The Mafia boss responded without turning fully. "I was invited." A pause followed. The new man stepped forward slowly, his gaze moving from the Mafia boss to the bride, then to the waitress standing beside him. His expression changed slightly when he noticed the jacket on the waitress's shoulders. The room felt tighter again, like it was shrinking under pressure. The bride swallowed hard, realizing this was no longer just a wedding conflict. The new man stopped near the center of the hall. "I heard what happened," he said. His voice was calm but firm. The Mafia boss finally turned toward him completely. "Then you already know enough." The silence deepened. The waitress stood between their attention, feeling like she was at the center of something far beyond her understanding. The new man looked at her directly. "Step forward," he said gently. She hesitated. The Mafia boss did not stop her. Slowly, she moved one step forward. The new man studied her carefully, as if confirming something important. Then he turned slightly toward the Mafia boss. "This is the one you mentioned." A faint shift passed through the Mafia boss's expression. "Yes." The bride's eyes widened slightly, confusion turning into fear again. She tried to speak, but her voice failed her. The new man nodded slowly. "I understand now." He turned toward the guests. "This gathering ends here." A ripple of shock moved through the hall. The bride took a shaky step backward. "Ends," she repeated weakly. The new man did not look at her. The Mafia boss raised his hand slightly. His men moved toward the sides of the hall, silent and precise. The atmosphere shifted completely, like a sealed door locking shut. The waitress felt her chest tighten again as reality bent around her. The Mafia boss stepped closer to her side. "You are leaving with me," he said calmly. Her eyes widened slightly. She did not understand why her life had reached this point so suddenly. The bride shook her head in disbelief. "You cannot just take her," she said. The Mafia boss looked at her once. "I already have." The words were simple, but final. The new man watched silently, as if approving the outcome. The guests remained frozen, unable to interfere, unable to react. The waitress looked down at the jacket on her shoulders again. It no longer felt like clothing. It felt like a symbol of a life she had never chosen. The Mafia boss extended his hand slightly toward her. A quiet invitation. Not a demand, but something that still could not be refused. She looked at his hand for a long moment. Then slowly, carefully, she placed her hand in his. The moment their hands touched, the entire room seemed to shift again. The bride closed her eyes briefly, as if accepting the end of everything she thought she controlled. The new man stepped aside. The path to the exit was clear. The Mafia boss began to walk forward, the waitress beside him. Every step echoed through the hall like a final judgment. Behind them, the wedding lights still shone brightly, but now they felt distant and empty. The guests did not follow. They did not speak. They only watched as the doors opened wider, revealing the night beyond. Cold air rushed in again, swallowing the last warmth of the ballroom. And as they stepped toward the exit, The truth behind the document, the reason for her protection, and the connection between the Mafia boss and the waitress remained unspoken, hanging in the silence like a secret too large for that room to contain. Cold air rushed in through the open doors and wrapped around the ballroom like a tightening grip. The chandelier lights flickered slightly, as if reacting to the change in atmosphere. The Mafia boss continued walking forward without hesitation. The waitress stayed beside him, her steps uneven but guided by his steady pace. Behind them, the bride remained frozen in place, her hands slowly lowered to her sides as the document slipped slightly, still clutched but forgotten. The new man stood in the center of the hall, watching them leave with unreadable calm. The guests did not dare move. The silence had become heavier than sound itself. The sound of footsteps echoed again as the group neared the threshold of the exit. The marble floor reflected their silhouettes like broken mirrors. The waitress glanced sideways at the Mafia boss, confusion still clouding her thoughts. She finally spoke in a quiet voice. "Why me?" The question barely reached the air. The Mafia boss did not look at her immediately. He continued walking for a few more steps before answering. "Because you were seen when you should have been ignored." The words made her breath pause for a moment. She did not fully understand them, but she felt their weight. They reached the doorway where the cold night air became stronger. Outside, the world looked distant and unreal compared to the suffocating ballroom. The Mafia boss stopped just before stepping out. He turned slightly toward her. "From this point forward, your life does not remain the same." The waitress swallowed hard, her fingers tightening slightly within his hold. She felt both fear and an unfamiliar sense of safety. Behind them, the bride finally took a step forward as if trying to regain control of something slipping away. "Wait," she called out, her voice breaking. The Mafia boss did not turn fully. The bride hesitated, then spoke again, softer this time. "I did not understand who she was." The Mafia boss replied without emotion. "That was your mistake." The words ended any remaining hope in her voice. The bride stopped moving completely. The new man in the hall observed everything in silence, as if measuring consequences no one else could see. The Mafia boss finally stepped outside into the night. The waitress followed closely beside him. The doors behind them began to close slowly on their own. As the gap narrowed, the last glimpse of the ballroom showed frozen guests, a shattered celebration, and a bride standing alone in the center of her downfall. The doors shut completely with a deep final sound. Outside, the night air was sharp and quiet. A long black car waited near the entrance, its engine already running softly. A driver stood nearby, head lowered in respect. The Mafia boss guided the waitress toward the vehicle without releasing her hand. She hesitated briefly before stepping forward. The car door opened smoothly as they approached. The interior was dim, private, and silent. He gestured for her to enter first. She slowly sat inside, still overwhelmed by everything that had happened. He followed and closed the door behind them. The outside world disappeared instantly. Inside the car, silence returned, but it was different now. Not tense like the ballroom, but heavy with unspoken truth. The Mafia boss leaned back slightly, his gaze forward. The waitress sat beside him, still processing her reality. After a moment, she spoke again. "Who am I to you?" The question lingered in the confined space. He did not answer immediately. The car began to move forward, leaving the glowing lights of the venue behind. The city outside passed in blurred reflections against the windows. Finally, he spoke in a low voice. "You are the reason certain people no longer sleep peacefully." Her eyes widened slightly. The statement carried something deeper than explanation. It carried history. She turned her head slightly toward him, searching his expression. But his face remained calm, unreadable and distant. The car continued through the dark road, moving away from the world she knew. Inside, the silence deepened again, but this time it felt like the beginning of something larger, something already written long before that wedding night ever began. The car moved steadily through the dark city roads. Streetlights passed over the windows like slow, blinking memories. The waitress stayed quiet, her hands resting tightly together in her lap. The Mafia boss remained still beside her, his gaze fixed forward. The silence between them no longer felt heavy with fear. It felt unfinished, like a sentence waiting for its final word. After a long stretch of time, The car finally slowed near a high-rise building that rose above the city like a shadow of glass and steel. The vehicle stopped at a private entrance. A guard opened the door immediately. Cold air entered again, softer this time, calmer. The Mafia boss stepped out first and offered his hand once more. The waitress hesitated, then followed him out. The building lobby was quiet, polished, and almost unreal in its stillness. They walked through it without being stopped. Elevator doors opened instantly as if expecting them. Inside, the rise upward felt slow and endless. The waitress stared at the changing numbers, her reflection faint in the metal walls. Finally, the elevator stopped at the top floor. The doors opened into a wide, silent penthouse space. City lights stretched endlessly through tall glass windows. The entire skyline looked distant and calm from up here. The Mafia boss stepped forward and stopped near the window. The waitress remained near the entrance, unsure where she belonged in this place. After a moment, she spoke softly. "Why did you bring me here?" He did not answer immediately. Instead, he looked out at the city for a long time. Then he finally spoke. "Because years ago, someone tried to erase you from existence quietly." Her breath caught. She tried to recall something, anything, but nothing came clearly. He turned slightly toward her. "You were not supposed to survive what happened to your family." The room felt colder, even without wind. Her eyes filled with confusion and a growing fear of forgotten truth. "What are you saying?" she asked quietly. He walked a few steps closer, stopping at a respectful distance. "I found you by accident," he said. "And when I did, I realized the people who hurt you were still powerful enough to come back." A long silence followed. The city lights outside flickered gently through the glass. Her voice softened. "So everything tonight, the protection, the wedding." He nodded once. "Was never about the wedding." The truth settled slowly between them. Not dramatic, not explosive, just final. She lowered her gaze, trying to understand a life she never knew she lost. Then she looked back at him. "And now?" He did not hesitate this time. "Now you choose." She stood still, listening. For the first time, no one was forcing her forward or pulling her back. Only silence surrounded her. Only the city stretched beyond the glass. She walked slowly toward the window. The world outside looked vast, uncertain, but real. Behind her, the Mafia boss did not move. He simply waited. After a long moment, she spoke again, her voice steadier now. "I do not want revenge." The words surprised even her as she said them. She continued, "I do not want to live inside fear anymore." The room remained silent. Then she turned slightly toward him. "I want my life back, even if it is different now." A faint shift appeared in his expression. Not surprise, something closer to acceptance. He nodded once. "That is enough." The city lights reflected across the glass, wrapping both of them in quiet illumination. No more crowds, no more judgment, no more wedding hall filled with broken pride. Only distance from everything that had defined that night. The Mafia boss stepped back slowly, giving her space without leaving the room. For the first time, she stood alone without feeling abandoned. She looked out at the city again, breathing steadily. Whatever her life had been before no longer mattered in the same way. And whatever it would become next would no longer be decided by fear or humiliation. Only by choice.